welcome Robin Baker.
Good morning. When Roger asked me to do this, it was interesting in that I often wonder if this might turn out like my daughter. I have two daughters and a son, and we went to Washington, D.C. this past year so I could introduce them to all the things I love. And we were walking on the Washington Mall, and my favorite monument is the Lincoln Memorial. And so we walked up the steps to the Lincoln Memorial, and I talked about the Gettysburg Address, which is on Lincoln's right. And then I turned to talk about the second inaugural on the left. And my daughter looked at me and said, "Dad, do we have to have another speech? Can we just sort of experience this and then move on?" So hopefully that won't be the scenario this morning. Lincoln is one of, by most historians' records, one of the top two presidents ever in American history. People feel very familiar with him. So I want to talk a little bit this morning about what is it that makes Lincoln powerful as a leader in the mid-19th century. But before I do that, help me out a little bit here with just if someone asks you what makes Lincoln memorable or powerful as a leader, give me one line. What would you say? I'm sorry? Character?
He had a tough wife.
He had a tough wife. Now that's an interesting I won't get into, but okay. Resiliency.
Honesty.
I'm sorry, honesty? Honesty, okay.
Bringing his political rivals into his cabinet.
Oh, very interesting. Bringing his political rivals into his cabinet.
Humility.
Perseverance.
Humility and perseverance. So you guys already know all this stuff. Learner, sense of humor. You know, do you notice how all of those things that you just mentioned, those are very, very good, are not techniques of leadership. They deal more with who Lincoln was as a person. And in a really powerful sense, I would argue that in the same context, leadership is really less about technique, more about knowing who you are, and about the vital character that you possess. And the same was true of Lincoln in the 19th century. Now, you have an outline, and I want to do just in 20 minutes a little bit about Lincoln. And I want to take you through 5 things that I think make Lincoln a very powerful leader and provide some evidence that would suggest those things are true. And actually, they deal very much with the things that you just mentioned. Now, in the little outline that you have, on the back page is his timeline. If you don't have some perspective on Lincoln, that'll give it. I won't go through it. And then the rest, there's one long address, and we won't read the whole thing, but I'll deal a little bit with it. It's second inaugural, considered probably the most significant piece of historical writing by a president in American history. How many of you have read the second inaugural? God, not many? 3. Oh, so if nothing else out of today, you will be introduced to the second inaugural. Now, one of the things that's most difficult to deal with in terms of thinking about Abraham Lincoln is we know the outcome of who Lincoln was, what he was about, and what he achieved. So it's always easy to think of Lincoln as a great leader because we know what happened. But that's not true in 1860. And you'll see on your little outline, I quoted Supreme Court Justice McLean, who when Lincoln was elected, he made this comment: "I believe it can be said that by the formal test of offices held and great deeds accomplished, he was the least qualified man ever elected, perhaps ever nominated by a major party." It's an interesting statement, right, for a man that would later become recognized by acclaim as one of the most significant presidents ever in United States history. You know, one of the things, I think it was Scott that mentioned that when people think of Abraham Lincoln, they often mention what I call the marketing things that Lincoln gave while he became president. Honest Abe, the rail splitter, the hard worker who came from the bottom to the top. All those things are true, but somewhat misleading in the sense that Lincoln was a brilliant man in the 19th century. He was a corporate attorney, and actually one of the most successful corporate attorneys in Illinois. He defended the McCormick Reaper Company against a very famous lawsuit in the mid-1950s. He was the only president ever to hold a patent. So sometimes the image that Lincoln attempted to create as he presented himself to the public There was nothing wrong with that image, but it sort of belayed the sort of underlying brilliance of the man who was actually very capable as he entered the presidency, in spite of what Supreme Court Justice McLean said. Now, character of a leader is what I want to think about and really talk about. And the first thing is something that you guys mentioned as I asked you the question. As you think about the key qualities of Lincoln that he brings to his leadership, I think one of the most important is the first thing on your outline. It says, Lincoln valued and respected talent, even if the person with the talent did not respect him. A contemporary of Lincoln in 1866 wrote this: "He was certainly a poor hater. He never judged men by his like or dislike for them. If any given act was to be performed, he could understand that his enemy could do it just as well as anyone else. If a man had maligned him or had been guilty of personal ill treatment and abuse and was the fittest man for the place, he would put him in his cabinet just as soon as he would his friend. I do not think he ever removed a man because he was his enemy or because he disliked him. He removed him because he was incompetent." That's a powerful statement for a man in political office, whether in the mid-19th century or today, that he did not fear those who took differing opinions from himself. In fact, you probably know there's a wonderful book called Lincoln and His Rivals. Lincoln appointed his chief rival in the Republican Party as Secretary of State, Seward. His chief ideological rival, the man who most disagreed with him, Salmon P. Chase, to the cabinet. 4 of his most 7 significant rivals later served in posts on the cabinet. Now, can you think of another president who did that in the 20th century? Not Theodore Roosevelt, not Franklin Roosevelt. They most often surrounded themselves with people who were their ideological contemporaries or people who shared their own perspectives on the world. Lincoln did not. And that would be something that would serve him well later on. Lincoln also understood, and I think this is something that would help politicians as they think about statesmanship today. He understood that in a free society, the nation is made up of people with differing interests. In an effort to govern the people, one had to continually adjust and readjust to accommodate the interests of the political system. Ideologues, this is a statement from Lincoln, ideologues do not govern well in a democratic system. Now, as you think about the polarization of politics today, that somewhat becomes, I think, a significant comment. Whether you're a business leader or a politician, being someone who understands, listens, and respects differing thoughts becomes powerful. Lincoln was also a learner. You used words like humility. Those are all sort of caught up in this. During the most important time in Lincoln's life, his time as a president, he grew as a result of intent and design. Now, most of you know, as I could tell from what you were saying, from his own experience, he ran for office the first time in 1832. So again, this was not a political neophyte. He finished 8th among 13 for 4 House seats in Sangamon County, Illinois. But he did not quit when he lost. He ran 2 years later and he won. He won re-election in 1836, in 1838, 1840, and 1854. He was elected to the National House of Representatives in 1846, and he served from 1847 to 1849. He ran for the Senate twice, and he lost both times. And then he won his party's nomination in 1860. And of course, kind of interestingly, at least for historians, if not for others, most people assume that Lincoln was going to serve 2 terms as they look back. It was very questionable that he would be reelected, and in fact, he struggled to be reelected in 1864. In his early political career, Lincoln's criticism of opponents was often harsh and showed minimal understanding of the other side. But later in his career, his speeches illustrated respect and care for opposing positions. And let me give you just a couple examples of how he thought through these things. At the Illinois State Fair, he used to give speeches all the time. Again, he's a politician. In October of 1954. Now watch your own perceptions of Lincoln, perhaps, and think about the crafting of this statement. This is about slavery, and slavery between 1850 and it says 1954 in your outline, doesn't it? That's a little wrong. So it's 1854. 1850 to 1860, the country is just divided over the issue of slavery in the territories. And Lincoln says this: if slavery did not now exist among them, the South, they would not introduce it. If it did not now exist among us, we should not instantly give it up. This I believe of the masses of the North and the South. Lincoln's statements that he would make publicly attempted to identify with both sides of an opposing view, while still crafting a powerful point. When he characterized one of the greatest moral battles of his time, it wasn't slavery, it was actually temperance, or the campaign against alcohol. Watch this statement and how true it is. When we strive for some great good, or oppose some great evil, it is extremely difficult not to spill out some of the goodness onto ourselves and the evil onto our opponents, creating a deep personal moral gulf. It is very difficult, in other words, professing or striving for something righteous, to avoid self-righteousness and moralistic condemnation. Now watch this part. This is the humor part. Abstainers, like myself, are on the one side, and drunkards are way over on the other, separated by an absolute moral gulf. The last phrase was his attempt, of course, to bring humor into the very true point that he just happened to make, and that is that in these tremendous debates that they would have in the 1850s about alcohol use, about slavery, that as you argued with the other side, you had a tendency to make them Satan and you God. And that drew tremendous frustration to the whole debate. And so Lincoln tried to draw back from that and say, we need to be more thoughtful indeed about the way we approach each other. You can also see it. Lincoln is elected obviously in 1860. I don't know how much you know about the political period at the time, but you realize he was elected president. He received no votes in the states of the what would become the states of the Confederacy. None. So you have a man elected as president of the United States that actually essentially was excluded from the ballot in most of the southern states. So he comes into office. By the time he's in his inaugural, 7 states have already left the Union and 4 are threatening to. He gives his first inaugural address then. This was the ending that he wrote first. And then right before he gives the speech, he writes a second. And I want you to see the difference. And the reason I'm giving this is to show you the sort of transition in thinking as he relates to who he's going to speak to. He reflects on what he said at first, and then he changes it. Okay? So this is the first ending. In your hands, my dissatisfied fellow countrymen, and not in mine, is the momentous issue of civil war. The government will not assail you. He's talking to the South. You can have no conflict without being yourselves the aggressors. You have no oath registered in heaven to destroy the government, while I shall have the most solemn one to preserve, to protect, and defend it. Yours, Abraham Lincoln. That's how it ended the first time. Now, he never did it that way. The actual ending is this one. I am loath to close. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained it, must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory, stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land, will yet swell the chorus of the Union, when again touched, as surely there will be, by the better angels of our nature. Now, a radical difference, right? What he did in the first was challenge them. What he does in the second is he calls them to a higher value. So, a person, a learner, a person who reacts to circumstance, who hears those and then changes. He was also a person of charity. I'm often reminded, charity actually today has the implication of giving something to someone who doesn't deserve it or to take it out. In the 19th century, it's the concept of love and grace. And Lincoln expresses this powerfully. He practiced forgiveness in its highest form. When you read his letters, you would describe them as magnanimous, as merciful, as forgiving. And I just wanted to give you 3 quick examples. These are all, one of the things as a historian, I love to read letters because I think they give you windows into a person's soul. And when you think about Lincoln, right, now I love the Civil War, so I love it because, not because of it's a great time in American history, it's a very painful time. 500,000 men lose their lives. There's tremendous death almost every day from 1861 to 1865, and Lincoln feels that pain. During that entire time, the White House was open to visitors that would line up at the door. He sometimes took visits from 200 citizens a day, and he would sit down and he'd talk with them. He wrote letters and corresponded with average people during the great crisis that was about him. And it just tells you so much about who he was. So, for example, these are 3 letters that he wrote to families who had lost sons in the war. The first he knew. This is the Ellsworth letter. This is how the letter went. In the untimely loss of your noble son, our affliction here is scarcely less than your own. So much of promised usefulness to one's country and of bright hopes for oneself and friends have rarely been so suddenly dashed as in his fall. In size and in years and in youthful appearance, a boy only, his power to command men was surpassingly great. In the hope that it may be of no intrusion upon the sacredness of your sorrow, I venture to address you this tribute to the memory of my young friend, your brave and early fallen child. Yours, Abraham Lincoln. And then this one is perhaps one of the most famous, to Lydia Bixby. It's actually played out in Saving Private Ryan. It reads this way: I have been shown in the files of the War Department a statement of the Adjutant General of Massachusetts that you are the mother of 5 sons who have died gloriously on the field of battle. I feel how weak and fruitless must be any words of mine which should attempt to beguile you from the grief and loss so overwhelming. But I cannot refrain from tendering to you the consolation that may be found in the thanks of the Republic they died to save. I pray that our Heavenly Father may assuage the anguish of your bereavement and leave you only the cherished memory of loved and lost, and the solemn pride that must be yours to have laid so costly a sacrifice upon the altar of freedom. And then to Fannie McCullough. It is with deep grief that I learn, Lincoln knew this man, it is with deep grief that I learn of the death of your kind and brave father, and especially that it is affecting your young heart beyond what is common in such cases. In this sad world of ours, sorrow comes to all, and to the young it comes with bitterest agony, because it takes them unaware. The older have learned to ever expect it. I am anxious to afford some alleviation of your present distress. Perfect release is not possible except with time. You cannot now realize that you will ever feel better, but this is not so. And yet it is a mistake. You are sure to be happy again. To know this, which is certainly true, will make you some less miserable now. I have had experience enough to know what I say, and you need only to believe it to feel better at once. For those of you who do not know, Lincoln lost 2 sons, Edward in 1850, and then Tad during the war in 1862. And when Tad died, it broke his heart. He was his favorite son. He often used to sit by his grave during the war and talk to him. And so you see, he was referring to his son Tad, the experience that he had, Willie, when he went and talked about that with this young woman. All right, 4th, Lincoln was a person with guiding principles which he held firmly. I'll give you like 3 examples here. In other words, this man has tremendous charity and love as he expresses it to other people. He tries to understand the differences that exist in the culture and the community. But he doesn't move away from the principles that he holds that guides his sort of perspective. So in the mid-1850s, there was a young man named Dan Stone. He and Dan served in the House of Representatives. And it's hard to know who wrote this, but anyway, they gave it together. We join in criticizing abolitionists, but let us keep things straight by saying first that we find slavery to be immoral. The institution of slavery is founded on both injustice and bad policy, after which we then criticize the abolitionists. But first you must lay the moral foundation for the argument. In 1860, he said, I say now, however, as I have all the while said, that on the territorial question, that is the question of extending slavery under the national auspices, I am inflexible. I am for no compromise which assists or permits the extension of the institution on soil owned by the nation. And any trick by which the nation is to acquire territory and then allow some local authority to spread slavery over it is as obnoxious as any other. At the same time then, he said, and this one became the key to his presidency, I hold that in contemplation of universal law and of the Constitution, that the union of these states is perpetual and forever. So, the man who would become president, for him, 2 things guided his perspective. Slavery was indeed immoral, but he was going to leave it where it was and not allow it to expand and die a natural death. And the one thing that he cared about more than anything else was the preservation of the Union, and he would fight for that no matter what. So the sense of guiding principle was really powerful for him. In the last 2 minutes that we have, I want to show you that Lincoln was a person of great faith. Now, the 19th century is really different from the 20th. It's hard to imagine, and one of the hardest things that students at a university or any place else have a difficult time understanding is the religious nature of the past. We live in a society that's moved in a slightly different direction in understanding of the world. But in the 19th century and before, the people themselves understood things in religious terms. And so when Lincoln crafted messages, when he spoke, he related to that. And he was also a deep person of faith himself. So one of the greatest messages in American history really is the second inaugural, and it is printed in the memorial on the left, on Lincoln's left-hand side. The second inaugural is so important because it's crafted at the end of the war. And most of the Republican Party wants to attack the South. I mean, when you think about it, how do you feel after a war in which 250,000 Union lives have been given? And you've had people that have given everything. You're angry at these folks and you want them punished. Almost every war ends that way, with the vanquished getting something that is painful. So in the midst of that, Lincoln gives his second inaugural. And the first part of it, he talks about the finish of the war, which happens a month after he gives this address. Okay? Now I want to go down on the last page that you have. It's the one that says "on the occasion." And then there's some bold and italic pieces I'm going to go to real quickly. But I want to read. "On the occasion corresponding to this 4 years ago, all thoughts were anxiously directed to impending civil war." Now notice again his words and how he connects to all sides. All dreaded it. All sought to avert it. Not just North and South, right? I mean, not just North, but North and South. While the inaugural address was being delivered from this place, devoted altogether to saving the Union without war, urgent agents were in the city seeking to destroy it without war, seeking to dissolve the Union and divide its effects by negotiation. Both parties deprecated war. They hated it. But one of them would make war rather than let the nation survive. And the other would accept war rather than let it perish. And then he has this funny phrase, "and the war came." 1/8 of the whole population were colored slaves, not distributed generally over the Union, but localized in the southern part of it. These slaves constituted a peculiar and powerful interest. Now skip down to the bold piece. Now this is the part that he relates to the difficulty of people that are of faith being divided. Both of these groups read the same Bible. They both prayed to the same God. And each group invokes God's aid against the other. Now watch what he says. "It may be strange that any man should dare to ask a just God's assistance in wringing their bread from the sweat of other men's faces." So he makes a judgment, right? Sort of. But then he's very careful, and this is humility. "But let us judge not, that we also be not judged." The prayers of both, meaning both sides, could not be answered. That of neither has been answered fully. And then he, unlike the people at his time, he divided himself from God. He stepped back and he said, here's the deal. The Almighty has His own purposes. "Woe unto the world because of offenses, for it must needs that offenses," this is a quote from the Old Testament, "it must needs be that offenses come, but woe to the man by whom the offense cometh." Then he ends, "If we shall suppose that American slavery is one of those offenses which in the providence of God must needs come, but which having continued through His appointed time, He now wills to remove, and that He gives to both North and South this terrible war as the woe due to those whom the offense came." In other words, we're all involved in this. "Shall we discern therein any departure from those divine attributes which the believers in a living God always ascribe to Him? Fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. Yet, if God wills that it continue until all the wealth piled up by the bondsman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn with a lash shall be paid by another drawn with a sword. As it was said 3,000 years ago, so it must be said today, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether." a powerful theological statement about the condition of the country at the time, and his interpretation of the war as payment, really, for an evil that had existed in the society for a long period of time. But then he stops, just like with the first inaugural, and he ends with charity. With malice towards none, and this is the most famous phrase, his most famous biography is entitled this, with malice toward none and charity for all. With firmness in the right, not that I know it, as God gives us the power to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in. And notice what the work is. It's not to attack the other group, but to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle and for his widow and orphan, and do all which we may achieve to create a just and lasting peace among ourselves and among all nations. So if you could place yourself in 1864, 65, and hear that, it would have been a radical message because it would not have been what you expected. And it is one of the reasons that as people thought about Lincoln after his death, he gained great status because he was a man that saw beyond his time to something else. And he challenged people to move beyond their own circumstances and hatred and anger into another experience. And that was leadership in its most powerful form, driven by deep interpersonal characteristics that led others to a different perspective on the world. So that's what I would say makes Lincoln unique. And it really applies whether you're a leader in a business or anything else as you seek to bring other people alongside to a vision that you might have to accomplish something. So we have about 6 minutes for questions. If you'd like to ask a historian about the past or not, we could eat and talk at the tables. But thank you. So do you have questions? Yes, sir. And I'll repeat them real quick.
I think some people say that great leaders only come about when you have great crises. And I just wonder if you take the Civil War out, would Lincoln, I mean, did he have, I kind of wonder what the Congress was like. Our Congress today and the divisiveness we live with. Would Lincoln be as great without the Civil War?
It's a hard, the question was, would Lincoln be as great without the crisis of the Civil War? It's a really difficult question for a historian to answer because we always only deal with what happened instead of the prospects of it. But I think that one of the things to look at is that in the 1850s, many people think of today's situation is very similar to the 1850s. The political system's divided ideologically. People way out apart from each other, unwilling to compromise. The presidents of the 1850s, almost no one remembers. So Lincoln emerges out of that situation, and you're right in that the crisis helps define it. But Buchanan, Fillmore, Pierce, they also had the same opportunity. They had an opportunity to take a crisis situation that existed in the country and envision something different. And they were totally incapable of doing so. So I would argue that it's not just the crisis, that the leader has to come in and envision the power of the circumstances that they're caught in and to carry the people to something different. And Lincoln was able to do that in ways that no one else 20 years prior had been able to do so. So, I don't know if that's of help. I think when you put it in a modern context and you say, well, business leader, that crisis helps because it engenders people's willingness to engage. But they don't have to follow you, right? They can go in sorts of all different directions. So in whatever situation a leader finds themselves in, I think it's their ability to craft a vision to say, this is our dream, this is where we're moving, and this is how we get there. And that's one of the things that at the moment, to take an old historian and put him in the modern sense here, I find frustrating with the current political debate. Because what Lincoln was willing to do was give, if I don't get elected, that's the way it goes. But folks, it's just not going well here in the country. So, I got 4 years, and this is what we're going to do. And if you don't want me after 4 years, then we're going to go in a different direction, and that's fine. I'll step by. But I've got to stand here. So as you think about today's political situation, you have that kind of confrontation where people, it seems to me, desire so much to continue that they can't really have a core that says, here's how it could be different. Here's what we need to do. Let's confront the tough issues. Because it's every bit a crisis, not in the same context, but in some other ways we're building to financially that our political leaders don't face today. Yeah.
I thought it was interesting how he was pretty firm in his convictions, but it seemed like he saw slavery, for example, but he saw the other side. Is that because his overall goal was the the unity of the country, or was it that with his strong conviction, moral belief for slavery?
Okay. Carl asked if Lincoln's interesting in that he has a really strong conviction against slavery, but yet he seems to compromise on, in order to get things done. I think it's Lincoln believes that slavery at its root is a basic denial of the freedoms that are described in the Declaration of Independence, so that a republic can't have slavery and have status in the world for its cause. So from an ideological perspective, he says, here's the deal, we can't keep doing this forever. But, as he said to the two groups, here, we have to understand the people in the South. It's like, I don't know, Thomas Jefferson said in 1820, the problem with slavery is we have a wolf by the ears. We can't decide whether to keep it or whether to let it go. And if you let it go, is it going to tear you up? I mean, what's it going to do to you? So we keep holding on. But it's getting fiercer. And so how does it come out? Whereas Lincoln said, that's right. And so what we're going to do is limit it. So he took a moderate position, right? He took a compromising stand. This is my ideological position. This is what I believe at root. This is my moral value. But we're not going to get there now. So what we're going to do is start here. And here meant to him, in historical terms, the limiting of slavery to no expansion. And he believed that it would die out, that free labor, it's a whole other discussion, but that free labor would overcome it. And so he believed in a democracy that it was impossible to at least not talk to each other about these issues. And he constantly told the South, you have nothing to fear from me. I am not going to end slavery wherever it is. And remember, he did not issue the Emancipation Proclamation until 2 years into the war. And then really for other reasons than just freeing the slaves. So later on, people would say Lincoln was not the great emancipator. He came late to the game. I don't actually think that's true. He always believed it. He just didn't believe that he could achieve union and end slavery. So his highest value was union. His second highest value was one that would cause the end of slavery later on. One more maybe? Yeah.
What do you see as the biggest differences and similarities between Lincoln and Obama?
Oh man, what do you see as the biggest similarities or differences between President Lincoln and President Obama? I don't know. History always needs to, just like with Lincoln. Remember, Lincoln was assassinated. I mean, if you ask people during Lincoln's presidency, and I meant what I said before, Lincoln believed, if you read his letters in the summer of 1864, he believed he was losing the election. Had it not been for Sherman's victory in Atlanta, Lincoln may not have had a second term, and we may have had a whole different scenario in the country. So one of the difficulties in making an opinion about a current leader is you don't have the perspective of time. So I would just say that as an important piece. There were a lot of people that hated Lincoln in the aftermath, including Republicans mainly. Republicans thought he was leading them in the wrong direction. There were lots of Republicans who hated the second inaugural because he did not give permission for the Republicans to penalize the South. And they wanted that. And when Lincoln died, it was their gift. If you look at Reconstruction, what the North imposed on the South was a gift in Lincoln's death, because he would not have done that. He wanted a just and lasting peace, and so that was really important. I think both are gifted orators. Unfortunately, you're going to get my opinion, which may be wrong, okay? I don't think that at the current point in time that President Obama he falls more on the ideological spectrum than he has a centrist. And again, I could be totally wrong, but I think what Lincoln was able to do, that no political leader in the modern era has been able to do, and that is, how many differing perspectives does he include on his cabinet? Whether George W. Bush or George H. Bush or President Obama, the tendency in our political age is to encourage your own perspective by surrounding yourself with people who are ideologues. And both parties seem to me to go to the ends of the spectrum rather than to talk about the center. So the real question is, how do you craft a vision that draws people together? And I would just argue that I don't see any politician doing that at the moment much. Senator Hatfield, to me, was one of the greatest examples of that. We would call that statesmanship in the past. And Hatfield was able to be a Republican economically and conservatively, but challenge the country on the issue of Vietnam. In other words, for Hatfield, he had a strong, just like Lincoln. To me, Hatfield would be more of a Lincoln character. Hatfield said, on this issue, I cannot compromise, even though my party wishes me to be something else. I stand on this. I'm sorry. So when I was in college, Hatfield's book, Conflicting Conscience, was really powerful to me because he said, here's the deal. This is me. If you want to kick me out of office, you must. But I have to stand here. And that's sort of refreshing for me, and that's the kind of leadership that I would personally resonate with that I don't see a lot. It'll eventually come because at some point we can't pay for all the stuff we currently do. So anyway, but that's a whole nother issue, and Stephanie, please, thank you very much for your graciousness.